Thumbs up across the board. A couple of us may tinker with speaking without microphones. If that's the case, roll with us. If you cannot hear us in the back, we're doing this for you guys in the back as much as we are for these clowns in the front. So please wave, please thumbs down. If you can't hear us, we'll do what we can to shout. Welcome to OTC's Constitution Day panel discussion. When we think of the Constitution, we typically think of these folks on the left-hand side. Think of a bunch of dusty old men, roughly half of them slave owners.
All of them pointed at me. I didn't
roughly half of them, like I said, roughly half of them slave owners, all of them property owning elites, white men, and creating a document that, while behind the times, is more or less infallible and doesn't change, and it's kind of one of those dusty old documents that you have to read. Well, that's not the case. The Constitution has been written over and over again as we've added amendments, some of them extremely consequential, which perhaps we'll talk about tonight. It's a very dynamic document that was not created with perfect infallibility. Instead, had lots and lots of errors that went into it and still exist to this day. Maybe we'll discuss some of them. So it's a very dynamic document. We'll talk about some of its history. Fortunately, we've been joined by a couple of history instructors. I'll give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves. And also, its contemporary application to our lives is oftentimes very controversial. I'm sure you hear that if you follow the news at all. So what I want to do is work our way through our panel, but before we do, let's just take a moment and introduce ourselves. I'm Mr. Andrew Crocker. I teach political science here at OTC.
My name is Greg French. I teach world history here at OTC.
My name is Jennifer Bump, and I teach history at the Ridgewood Valley campus.
Hi, I'm Bill Prince. Can you hear me? Or am I just talking to myself?
It's lit up.
Is it lit up? Do you hear me way back there? Okay. My name is Bill Prince. I teach political science here. That's just part of my day job, though. Rose and I are the adjuncts on the panel, I guess. And so when I'm not teaching here, I'm the family court administrator and chief juvenile officer for Greene County. So I'm an attorney. So I'm going to be talking about the Constitution as it relates to juveniles today.
And as Bill said, I'm Rose Barber, and my day job is also in law. I work in the state court system, but I teach at OTC in the poli-sci department, and I see some of my students here. I'm glad to see that. And I will be taking on the idea of how difficult it is to change the Constitution.
Thank you so much. And like I said, we're going to work through each of our panelists here. We've got roughly 50% history, 50% political science. And just the one key question I want to ask each of our panelists, we'll go down the line. Rose, can we start with you? Is that okay? Can you set the tone for us, please? And could you tell us, just in line with trying to learn new things about the Constitution, things we either didn't know exist or things we didn't know about the parts we do know exist, could you tell us something that fascinates you or interests you about the Constitution that most Americans perhaps wouldn't know?
I was really surprised just in doing my own research for today that although we only have 27 official amendments to the Constitution, there have only been 6 other officially proposed amendments that were not then ratified. But in terms of just what was introduced in Congress, there have been over 10,000 attempts to change our Constitution, which were not successful. And some of them, I can tell you the 6 that made it, they're to me maybe not nearly as interesting as the 6 or 7 or 8 or, gosh, 9,900, okay. The idea is a lot of constitutional change can be talked about, and so you can introduce something in Congress and then it really not go very far. And you might be glad of that when I tell you that one of the amendments in 1914 was to propose that divorce be made illegal, that there could be no divorce in the United States. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's thought-provoking, isn't it, at the very least?
You said in 41?
That was in 1914.
14.
Yeah. So different time and place, maybe, I don't know, but in terms of everything old being new again, you know that we sometimes get pretty frustrated with Congress. And one of the earliest changes that didn't make the cut in terms of being considered for ratification was in 1876 when there was a proposal to get rid of the Senate altogether. So apparently the Senate really wasn't pulling its weight that year, I don't know. And then another one of my favorites, we're trying to name a puppy in our family right now, so this was a good one for me, but there was a constitutional amendment proposed in 1893 to rename our nation United States of the Earth. So I don't know what we were trying to accomplish with that, but, you know, broad idea.
How did that influence your puppy's name?
Well, we were looking, you know, for the appropriate name, and apparently, you know, United States of America wasn't cutting it back in that day, so, you know, it's all in the name.
That'd be a great name for a dog, United States of the Earth.
Yeah. But the 6 runners-up, you know, the 6 who came close, they were officially proposed out of the Congress to the states, but the states then in turn did not ratify them. The first one was to put in the Constitution itself how we would determine representation in the House in terms of numbers, to come up with a formula that we would always follow, and that didn't fly. And so instead, we have a statute now that dates all the way back to 1929 that says that there will be 435 representatives, which seemed like a lot back then, but now, if you kind of divide that out per person in the United States, we have 1 representative per 646,000 people in the United States. So as much as you may not want Congress any larger than it already is, maybe we need it to have a little closer representation. The second one that almost made it but didn't was going to make it a crime for any of us, not just, you know, the politicians, but any of us to accept a title of nobility from another country unless Congress gave us permission. But that one didn't make it, so if any of you have any, you know, pending chances to become a lord or a countess or anything like that, I think you're good. The third one was an attempt, and you all can speak to this way more than I can, but it was an effort to try and divert or avoid the Civil War, and it was a proposed amendment in 1861 to make it only a matter for state decision to change or do anything in terms of what they called their domestic institutions, and that included slavery. I had never heard of that before. I was shocked. Kind of troubled and glad that one did not make it. We tried to do something about child labor that went nowhere, and so Congress has taken care of that with laws. The one you've probably heard of, and you may have heard of it so much that you think it is an amendment, but it's not, is the Equal Rights Amendment from the 1970s. So I'm old enough, I remember talking about that one. That one was proposed but never was ratified in enough states. Some states did ratify it, but not enough. And then finally, if you are from Washington, D.C., or you visit there, you know this because you see the bumper stickers. They're not happy about this. They wanted greater voting rights, and they wanted that put in the Constitution as kind of a token, a peace token. We gave them 3 electors in the Electoral College, but what they had wanted as an amendment would have treated the District of Columbia as a state in terms of having representation in the House, and it didn't fly. So nothing too exciting there. I think United States of Earth is a little more exciting, but
I like that. I think, you know, I had been reading quite a bit about the Equal Rights Amendment. You want to talk, what was the Equal Rights Amendment, Rose? Do you mind speaking to it?
Yeah, so part of the, you know, this idea that you could propose something and then ratify it was a little vague, but the Equal Rights Amendment fell under what is now pretty much the trend that when you propose amendment, you give a certain period of time for it to be ratified. And if it's not ratified within that window, dies on the vine. What was proposed in the Equal Rights Amendment would be gender equality between men and women, and it basically said, it was very simple, and it said that there would be equality of rights under the law between men and women. Not really a whole lot there, but didn't make the cut in 1971.
Yeah, and there's a couple obstacles, political and legal, to the Equal Rights Amendment. Again, the Equal Rights Amendment was a proposed amendment not added to the Constitution. Now, we haven't mentioned this, but in Article 5, it talks about ratifying changing the Constitution through an amendment. And you need 2/3 of Congress, 2/3 of the House, and 2/3 of the Senate in order to propose a change to the Constitution. Equal Rights Amendment, which again says men and women are equal explicitly, did get that support. It did get that support, and as you said, and it was passed to the states. Now, at this point, you need 3/4 of the states, which out of 50 states, 38, in case you needed help with the math. That's 38 states. And back in March, I believe this year, I think it was Nevada. Nevada ratified, they voted to support it, which makes us up to, gets us up to 36 out of 38 states. 36 out of 38 states. So we're still two states shy, of which Missouri is one of them. So Missouri has not supported the Equal Rights Amendment. If Missouri voted today, we'd be one state away. Now, the 14th Amendment provides us equal rights, so perhaps the amendment's redundant. But again, it's an amendment saying men and women are the same, or should be treated the same, should be treated equally. So I don't know what that particular controversy is all about. But you said something about the time limit. Can you just specify that one more real quick?
Yeah, so I think the idea is, and I would have to kind of dig here to find you the exact year, but originally it could be wide open. And some of you know from your classes that it's taken a long, long time, maybe even over 100 years for some proposed amendments to finally make it into the Constitution. But in the 1800s, somewhere midway, they started setting limits. When Congress would officially propose the amendment to the states, they would give a window of time for the states to consider it. And I think that was challenged to the Supreme Court, whether or not the Congress could do that, because the Constitution doesn't say that expressly, but I think the court ruled that was within Congress's power to do. And so they don't have to put a limit on it, but if they do, then if you don't make the limit, you got to start all over again.
Outstanding, thank you so much. And with a political science person now having discussed it, let's move over to a history person. Can I move on to Jennifer? Would you be okay with speaking? Again, this is Miss Jennifer Bump. Again, just to reiterate the question, could you tell us something about the Constitution that you think most people perhaps wouldn't be aware of?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to talk to you about everybody's favorite amendment, the one that everyone loves so much, prohibition. No one loves prohibition. Prohibition was the 18th Amendment of the Constitution. It was ratified in 1919. Greg, can you tell us what event was happening in U.S. history in 1919?
You're putting me on the spot, Jennifer. The end of World War I?
Oh, the end of World War I. So a little context for you here. It went into effect on January of 1920. So they had 1 year to prepare. And people prepared for prohibition. Now let's be sure that we know what we're talking about with the Prohibition Amendment. Prohibition was the outlaw of the manufacture, transport, and sale of alcohol, not the consumption. So if you were a farmer and had the ability to preserve your fruit, that was fine. You could preserve your fruit and consume that any way you wanted to, right? That was just fine. So what's going on with prohibition is that we have a nation of drinkers, big time. If we go all the way back to the beginning, we're talking like Puritans coming over. We have John Winthrop. Does the name John Winthrop at least kind of sound familiar as a colonial guy, right? He was a Puritan. This is prior to the Holiness Movement. And when he came over, the ship that he came over on, there was more beer in the hold than there was water in the hold, okay? So not great at colonizing places. Why is everyone dying? Because there's beer and not water, right? So George Washington, the father of our country, we all love him. During the Revolutionary War, he made sure that the Continental Army, each member had at least, let me get this right, 4 ounces of liquor a day. They didn't have food, shoes, or clothing, but gosh darn it, they had 4 ounces of liquor a day.
Jennifer, can I jump in for 1 second?
Oh.
To defend the drinkers?
Oh, no, I'm not. Listen, it's fine.
Just in the 18th century and 17th century, drinking alcohol is much safer than drinking water.
Why?
Because it to make alcohol, those of you that are home brewers maybe know this, right? You have to heat up the water, right? So you kill the germs. You get a nice little scurvy busting boost of antibiotics while you're at it, hence the rum ration, right? So there is a purpose behind this. Keeps you from getting sick, kills germs.
Sure, absolutely. That's great. So then it's like, we want to keep from getting sick all of the time, right? So here are some examples for you. Everyday Americans by 1830, the average American 15 years old or older, consumed 7 gallons of pure alcohol a year. That is 3 times as much as we consume today. Alcohol was easily accessible. A gallon of alcohol cost about 25 cents per gallon. With inflation, that would be $5.10 per gallon today. That is some cheap liquor, right? And so, what's the problem with all of this? Well, alcohol use primarily by men was causing havoc on the lives of many, particularly in an age where women had few or no legal rights. Their husbands could go to the tavern where women were not allowed to go. Women could not go into saloons, and they would drink away the family's money. Also, the only group of women allowed into saloons were prostitutes. Let you make some connections there. And so men were drinking away their wages. They would come home, beat their wives, mistreat their children, and women had absolutely no protections. And so you see, start to see groups like the WCTU, which was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, speaking out about the fact that women had no rights, and their husband could drink away the wages, and they'd be forced to starve. By 1911, the WCTU had 245,000 members, making it the single largest women's organization to that point in time in history, even more than suffrage.
Wow.
And so this was, the idea of protection for the home was a major issue. And so you had, domestic violence was really high, just violence in general. And so the Prohibition Amendment gets a lot of bad press because everyone's like, organized crime, boo,
Right.
You know? And that's legit. I'll give you that
The
much.
popular conception is that when the 18th Amendment was passed, organized crime really got a foothold, made a lot of money, created speakeasies.
Mhm.
Is that a good understanding?
That is partially true. The crime rate in Chicago specifically went up, but in most other places in the country it stayed what we would consider constant for that time period. But let me give you some of the stats after Prohibition went into effect. Wife beating and lack of family support decreased 82%. Drunkenness decreased across the board around 55%, assault by 53%, vagrancy by 52%, deaths due to cirrhosis of the liver because of drinking too much decreased somewhere between 50 to 64%. Again, savings accounts tripled, the crime rate basically stayed constant except for Chicago. So we have this whole thing about Prohibition. We say it was the worst amendment ever and it deserved to be repealed, and it did, right? But some really great things came out of Prohibition as well, as far as awareness for the rights of women, again, domestic violence going down. So there's some great stuff that we shouldn't forget about.
And again, Prohibition banning alcohol was the 18th Amendment. The 21st repealed it. Use of the 21st is justified. Just from that list that you're reading, it sounds unjustified. It sounds like a prohibition should stay in place. Why is the 21st, in your opinion, justified?
I think it's really hard to get away with an amendment that tells people what they can't do, right? That limits the rights of people. And I think why the 18th Amendment was successful is because, if you Google alcohol awareness programs, you sit there and have to scroll through pages and pages and pages and pages. We drink 3 times less alcohol than they did, right? And so it's accomplished what it's needed to accomplish, and the good people of the United States are much better about being aware of the issues that alcohol presents.
Are you able to speak to this, the fact that maybe flat out banning it maybe was the critical error of the 18th Amendment, maybe a half measure somehow?
Well, they didn't all out. You could still brew at home. That was not banned, right? So you could still have alcohol. It was the transporting and sell of alcohol, right? I think that banning alcohol was good for the U.S. because it make people aware where they were not aware before. And really, why did the 21st Amendment, why did the repeal, why was it successful in 1933?
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Is it a response to the Great Depression?
It is a